All right, this is Math 209 Week 2, and we are using the zero property to solve factored equations. All right, so when the directions say solve the equation, all right, so what does that mean? Well, basically what it means is we're going to graph this equation. So this equation happens to be 5x times x plus 8. And we're going to graph that equation, and the handy dandy way of doing that is to use Desmos, and there's my Desmos. And when I graph my equation, you will see I get this beautiful parabola. It's called a parabola. And the cool thing about this parabola is it crosses the x-axis in two locations. So we're going to zoom in, and you're going to see that it crosses right here at 0, at x equals 0, and then it crosses right here at x equals -8. All right, so that's our answer. So Desmos gave us the answer, because basically when you're solving an equation, what you're doing is you're trying to find out where does that graph cross the x-axis. And since it crosses the x-axis in two locations, 0 and -8, that's your answer, 0 and -8. So technically, you can put that in and move on to, put that into MyMathLab, and that's your answer. But they want us to solve it using what's called the zero product property. And basically what that means is they're saying you've got two numbers, this number right here times this number right here. All right, and it equals 0. So the thing is, if you're multiplying two numbers, a times b, and you know the answer is 0, well, that tells you either a equals 0 or b equals 0. Because the only way you could get the answer of 0 is if one of these guys is equal to 0, because any number times 0 is 0. Now, of course, both of them could be 0 as well. But we know at least one of these numbers, a or b, has to be 0. So going back over here, since we know that 5x is a number, times x plus 8, which is a number, since we know multiplying these two numbers equals 0, that tells us either 5x is equal to 0 or x plus 8 is equal to 0. It means one of these guys is equal to 0 or both. So now we're going to solve the equation. So when we solve, we divide both sides by 5, and the 5's cancel, and so you end up with x is equal to 0 right here, or over here we're going to subtract both sides by 8, and so the 8's cancel, and you end up with x is equal to -8. And so there is our answer. X is equal to 0 or x is equal to -8. And we knew that all along because our Desmos told us so right there. So you have two choices. You have a choice. You can either use Desmos and let Desmos do the work, or you can use your algebra and let the algebra do the work. Now the key is the algebra is going to work every time. Desmos will only work when your answer is clearly an integer, when it clearly goes through an integer value. If your answer is some sort of decimal or a fraction, Desmos isn't really going to help you a whole lot. So again, we have another equation here. You've got y minus 5 times y minus 2, and that equals 0, and we want to solve the equation. So the way we could use Desmos, now the tricky thing about Desmos is it really only likes the variable x. All right, so x is our variable, so we're going to have to replace those y's with the letter x, with the variable x. And when we do that, you'll notice down here that our parabola crosses right here and it crosses right here at x equals 2 and x equals 5. So there are our answers. So Desmos has already done the work for us. So we know the answer is 2 and 5. All right, but we are going to do the work also algebraically, because it's not always going to work with Desmos, because the answer might at some point be a fraction. So y minus 5 times y minus 2 equals 0. So because we've got two numbers, y minus 5 being multiplied by y, we've got y minus 5 being multiplied by y minus 2. So these two numbers are being multiplied by each other, and it equals 0. So that means either y minus 5 is equal to 0 or y minus 2 is equal to 0. So now we're going to solve our algebraic equations. So the 5's cancel. That leaves you with y is equal to 5. And then over here we're going to add 2 to both sides. So the 2's cancel and you end up with y is equal to 2. And so there are our two options. So either y is equal to 5 or y is equal to 2, and that's what Desmos said all along. So again, I'm going to skip the Desmos because I think we get it now. So you got x minus 1 and 3x plus 1, and that is equal to 0. So that tells us either x minus 1 is equal to 0 or 3x plus 1 is equal to 0. So now we're just going to solve using algebra. So we're going to add 1 to both sides. The 1's cancel, and that leaves us with x is equal to 1. So that's one option. And then over here on the right, we're going to begin by subtracting both sides by 1. So the 1's cancel, and that leaves us with 3x is equal to negative 1. And now we're going to divide both sides by 3. So the 3's cancel, and you end up with x is equal to negative 1/3. And there are our two options. So either x is equal to 1 or x is equal to negative 1/3. So this is a perfect example of where Desmos would not work, because Desmos would not give you the answer as a fraction. So this one is the exact same as everything else. The only difference is now we have 3 terms. So you've got x times x minus 5 times x minus 4, and that equals 0. So one of these 3 numbers has to equal a 0, because that's how we get a product of 0. So either x is equal to 0, x minus 5 is equal to 0, or x minus 4 is equal to 0. Well, this guy is already done. That algebra is already done. So now we're going to take a look at this one. So we're going to begin by adding both sides by 5. So the 5's cancel. That leaves x is equal to 5. And then over here, we're going to add 4 to both sides. So the 4's cancel, and that leaves x is equal to 4. So our 3 options is x equals 0, or x equals 5, or x equals 4.